Welcome to the People Are People podcast, life lessons learned in real time, where we touch on the crazy realities of dealing with human behavior in the workplace. In 2022, I am presenting a series that I simply call the New Manager Series, where we will focus on a variety of topics every manager needs to know to be successful during and beyond their first year of management. Being a manager is not always a pretty job. It comes with highs and lows that you must prepare yourself to navigate. This week, we are going to answer one simple question. What does your team do? Before we dive into answering that question, for my mahoganyspeakstoyou.com viewers out there on YouTube, I just want to take a moment to remind you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can be notified each time I upload a brand new video. So let's dive into this topic. What does your team do? I don't know about you, but this question is not as easy to answer as one might think it is. The answer to this question can be very complex, depending on the type of service or product that it is your team is delivering. First of all, to answer this question, you have to have a very good sense of who your customer is, who your target audience is. What is the service or product that you are trying to deliver, and who is the target audience that is receiving that particular service or product? Oftentimes, as brand new managers, you're going to find that sometimes even your boss is not clear on who it is you support. They will think they have a sense of who it is you support, but there may be a few other players that, could come into play that you need to have an awareness for. So consider this. As I've mentioned before, I had the experience of having 6 different leaders in an 18-month period. So it is highly plausible that you could have someone who is in charge of your area that really doesn't have a true sense of who your target audience is. Therefore, it will be imperative that you get a handle on it. Now, hey, it's great if they know who it is you support. Awesome. Take that information down. Make sure you're very aware of who they are, where they, sit in the scheme of locations. If they're physically in the building, it's always good to know where in the building they're located. If you're working remotely, it's great to get a sense of where in the country they might be based in case, you ever have to meet with them or, might anticipate them reaching out to you. But you want to have a very clear perspective of who it is you support. What's the skill set of the people on their team, potentially, if your team has to interact with them. You want to have a sense of how it is you support this group of individuals. And additionally, you want to have a sense of potential outliers that could come into play. Unfortunately, in the corporate world, there are always outliers. And so you need to have a sense of who are the regulars, so to speak, that, although you don't technically support them, on occasion you may have to provide some support or, share your service with them, versus who are the outliers that maybe you don't support, but could later become noisemakers should you push back on providing support. And I know it's a hard truth, but yes, in the corporate world, there are going to be those times when you just have to know who it is that, potentially is not going to necessarily have your interest at heart or, the needs of your team at heart. They're going to be focused on the needs of their team, their department, and will likely escalate to your leadership should you decide not to provide your product or your service to them. So that's another podcast. But again, I say this to say you want to understand who your target audience is, who are the outliers that you still may end up having to support, and then, who could potentially become noisemakers if you don't support them. Additionally, you want to have an understanding of, going back to the employee level, an idea of the job descriptions that are out there for the individual roles on your team that you manage. Now, we kind of talked about early on in our series, about getting to know your employees, understanding, their roles or what they do, having a sense of their educational and work experience background. But if you're working in a corporate environment, or even if you're working in a small business, ideally there's some form of HR, and you should have a sense of the job description for your employees. When they came through the door, there's likely a potential that they received some sort of a job description. And even if they didn't, you as a manager should still have a sense of what's in that job description. There's a high likelihood that you will eventually have to hire someone to backfill their role should they move on, or should you get approval to add to your positions. So you're going to want to have a sense of what exactly is written in that job description. How ambiguous is it? How detailed is it? Is there a potential that you need to make modifications? As a new manager coming on board, you may have a sense of some potential gaps, maybe that need to be addressed within that job description. Or should you need to post that position later on and you feel that the language, is a bit ambiguous for the role or the position itself, whoever it is you might be going after to backfill that role or to fill the role in general, you're going to want to make sure that the language is very clear, right? That you're looking for a very distinct skill set. And let's say if you were dealing with medical people, you might be looking for distinct licenses. Maybe you're dealing with project management types where you're looking for specific certifications, right? Those are the kinds of things that you're going to want to look for in the job description. So, again, when you're asking yourself, what does my team do? You're going to want to have a sense of those things, right? Who is your target audience? What's the service or product that you are supposed to be delivering to that group? Who are the outliers that you still may have to support? Bringing it down to the employee level, getting a sense of what the job description actually says for them. And hey, it won't hurt to get your own job description as well if you can get your hands on that. Keep in mind that these days, unlike maybe 20 years ago where you had a 3-page job description, at some companies it's whittled down to like a paragraph, sadly, or it may be a paragraph and then a bunch of bullet points that point to specific skills that you're looking for. But these are the kinds of things that you're going to want to have a sense of as it relates to the job description. Competencies. Again, going back 10 to 15 years ago in a job description, you typically would have seen competencies listed there. These days, that is not always the case. So you will want to find out if there's any pre-existing, documents or tools or resources out there that have identified, what are the core competencies each person on your team should, be demonstrating based on their role. And if that does not exist, then you're going to want to put that on your list of things to do over the next 180 days, maybe 6 months to a year, in defining what the competencies are for people in the various roles that you're managing. And I say this because when you're evaluating people on their performance, yes, there are very specific metrics that you are typically evaluating them for. But you also want to look at their competencies. How is that lining up? Is there an alignment to, the metrics to the competencies? Typically with competencies, those are like the baseline things that the employees on your team should be doing. So if they're not executing at that level, this goes back to, that conversation around job mismatch. Are you then dealing with a job mismatch in which you have someone who technically maybe isn't qualified to be in that role, and it does not appear that they will, ever be qualified to be in that role. And of course, that becomes a whole other conversation. But, competencies, I think it's a lost art, but you need to have it, I think, just as a foundation to identify where it is your employee should be, in their skill set and the jobs that they are doing. Now, you have to kind of think of this as an opportunity to ensure, again, that you've got the framework in place that you need for your team to be successful. And the other thing it helps with is being proactive. And I can't stress enough, as someone who was in management for quite some time, the need to be proactive, because it's hard enough, it's particularly depending on the work environment you are in. it will be very challenging enough just to be the manager, trying to be a people manager on top of trying to manage workflows and processes and different projects as a manager. So you always want to make sure that you have the baseline in place to ensure that your area is going to function well and that the little things aren't going to get you in trouble. Now, when evaluating what it is your team does, we've talked about understanding who the client is or who the customer is, understanding the job itself of everyone, including yourself, and the competencies that are necessary. You're going to also have to take a step back and look at whether or not your team has access to the right resources, technology, policies and procedures, and if the right staffing model is in place to execute on what it is your team does. Now, it is likely that you will not really have the answer to this in the first 30 days of being on the job or even the first 60 days, unless you're hiring manager, VP, whoever, comes to the table with this information in hand. Sometimes when there's been a clean sweep of an area, and when I say clean sweep, meaning all of the previous leadership is gone and it's brand new leadership coming in, sometimes there's a rapid assessment that takes place, or a SWOT even, where, that information becomes very apparent really quickly, right? Whether or not your team has access to the right resources, human capital, all of that good stuff. If all of that is in place, it becomes very evident when it's not in place and when there's been a purposeful assessment of what's already there. However, again, there are times when you're coming in as the sole new body, the new eyes, the new ears, and it may take you a while to ascertain as to whether or not everything you have is what is needed or if it's adequate. So what I would encourage you to do, as you're, taking a look at, what the team does, is to definitely get a sense of, where are the policies and procedures, if any? Do any exist? If there aren't any policies or procedures, is there a playbook? Is there something that outlines exactly what it is your team does? Because that's important, not only for you, to have handy, but also for your team. Sometimes for people who have been there for a while, they've seen so much change come on that it can be a little bit confusing as to whether or not they're still doing things the right way. For new people coming into, your department, anyone you might hire later on, it'll be very helpful to be able to point them to information that they can review during their onboarding process. It can be very helpful to have those things handy, some type of policies, procedures, or playbooks, something that, the new people on your team can access to get a better sense of what it is, they do, how they do it, whether or not they're doing it correctly. Additionally, staffing, making sure you're very clear about your staffing model and whether or not what's in place is enough. Now, it is highly likely that even if you determine that you don't have enough people, you likely will not be able to, suddenly build your team unless there's funding just sitting over there waiting for you to tap into it. Most of us in the management field know that it's very rare that you actually have funds available to suddenly, build up your team. However, it can help with long-term planning, long-term strategies, maybe even reassessing some of the processes you have in place. Are they efficient for the staff that you have available? Sometimes there is downsizing that has happened before you get there, but your team is still being held accountable for doing a job that, that, let's say, for example, maybe you have a team of 6 or a team of 10, but maybe a year ago it was a team of 20. Well, expecting this same team to maybe do things the same way they did a year ago or 2 years ago may not be feasible or the best decision, right? So that may be where, again, you have to start looking at some short-term and long-term strategizing, planning as it relates to whether or not you're going to continue with any specific policies or procedures that are in place, or if you're going to have to look at a new way of doing things in order to still meet the needs of your target audience. Next, technology. We want to always make sure that the team has the right technology. Again, this is going to get into budgeting, obviously, and no, you may not be able to fix it right away, but you can also just begin to track, where is it that you guys are doing well with your technology, and perhaps potentially where do you need to go in the future with your technology, again, to make sure that your team is doing things as efficiently and accurately as they can be doing it, without wearing on them. So there you have it. There you have it. The next time someone asks you, what does your team do? Hopefully you will have completed a few of these action items so that you can comfortably and confidently answer the question. All right, folks. Thanks for listening to the People Are People podcast, Life Lessons Learned in Real Time. If you are watching this video on YouTube, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can be notified the next time I upload a video. Everyone stay safe, and I'll catch you in my next podcast.